Hello and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Anne, and I am so excited to have with me today not only contributors to this ministry, but good friends, Todd and Stacy. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Ann, thanks for having us. It's great to be back.
Thank you.
Always great to have you. Well, it's the month of March, and our theme for this month is work. And so we've been talking about work in all different aspects, and not only kind of our professions, our jobs, but also just generally ways that we can be sort of creative, whether it's in the home or in hobbies that we have. So we wanted to continue on with that theme. And our very first episode on work was with Edward Lursman, who is another contributor and good friend of our ministry. And we were talking about, I guess, some of the challenges that we might face in our workplace when we are in a season of infertility or loss. And that was a really great episode. And I'd encourage listeners to go back. We'll link that in the show notes and listen to some of the great sort of advice and suggestions that Edward had. But we wanted to kind of go deeper and continue to flesh that out a little bit more. And I couldn't think of anybody better to have than Todd and Stacy. They've been on the podcast before. And as I said, they're contributors to the ministry. And Todd and Stacy, I know that this is something that the two of you have thought a lot about, and even in your own marriage and in your own experience, some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of the workplace and managing those challenges that come up in this season. I know that you have been really thinking a lot about them. So I want to go ahead and kind of dive right into that. And I guess, first of all, to maybe start off with what you have identified perhaps as some challenges that can come up in the workplace when we are in this season. And Stacy, let me go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. So I think some of the challenges, and for me, for us, it was kind of double track in that. So I work in a female dominated workplace. So not only are there um, pop-up announcements and pictures and people visiting, bringing their grandkids or their children, there's also just comments in the everyday work um, and comments that were unintentional, and especially in the early part of that raw grief, it really hit tender places. So comments like, well, I became a better fill in the blank now that I'm a parent,
Mm-hmm.
or as a parent, well, I know this experience, and just really feeling really crushed by those comments, because then the thoughts start to spin. I start to feel less than, and I would bring this home, both the announcements and these comments, and in us figuring out early on how to navigate that was tricky. Um, and part of that is early on, it was also just hard for us to talk about the grief. We were experiencing it
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the double track challenges. And there may be folks out there that are right in the middle of that now.
Yeah, absolutely. What you are saying really resonates with me. And, you know, these comments that people make, well, first of all, they're sharing good news. I mean, this is good news. These are good things, right? But when we are in that tender place, as you say, it's hard for us sometimes to receive it in that way. And people are not intentionally
That's
trying
right.
to hurt us. But it can be difficult. We are feeling that really tender spot. And you're right. It's sort of like a double whammy at home. Here we are, perhaps, uh, going through treatments or just trying to conceive, and that has its own pressures and stress. And then we go to work and we have this sort of unintentional stress that's added on. So it can be really, really difficult. Todd, I don't know if the situation is any different for you, as a man in the workplace. I would imagine that, as Stacy said, men and women, we sort of grieve and process all of this differently. So I mean, I don't know if you experienced any of that as well, or if you were able to just kind of, well, if these announcements come up, you just kind of hear them and just sort of move on.
I think, at least in our situation, as Stacy alluded to, kind of generally worked in workplaces where there are fewer those types of announcements, not just those
Mm-hmm.
like a pregnancy announcement, but just personal announcements in general. People keep, I think, like in comparing our workplaces, our there's maybe people are a bit more, not entirely, but a bit more private, comparatively speaking. So,
Mm-hmm.
I have it come up less, and so I think that's something that we, as Stacey mentioned, just with the general issue of trying to get to a point where we could kind of talk about our grief and work on it together. Also, um, and maybe this might resonate with some of the listeners, came at this particular issue of the workplace from two different, as Stacey likes to use the expression, I think it was really different stripes of the beach ball, because she was more, I guess, inundated with with potential triggers, or not potential, but triggers in the workplace than I am. But it certainly um, comes comes up, some as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Todd, and something I think for us to keep in mind as we're trying to navigate these kind of workplace announcements and challenges, because there can be really different cultures of the workplace as well. And you bring up a good point too, Todd, that in some workplace cultures, I guess sort of those personal announcements are maybe kind of downplayed a little bit, or it's just not a place where people are sort of overt in talking about those kinds of things. So yeah, there's all different work cultures, and then the ways that we each kind of process them according to our personality, and of course that male female difference. So there's so many layers. It's all so complex, and I think that's one of the reasons why people in this community often kind of ask us about this, whether it's on our Facebook page or Instagram, or they email us and they say, gosh, I just don't know how to navigate the workplace when these announcements and
Really hard.
showers, and then too, Stacy, you mentioned people bringing in their grandkids. How do we kind of manage that? And in that episode with Edward, we dove into that a bit, and he gave some great suggestions for us, sort of personally, and how we can prepare a little bit for those things. And I mentioned, wow, it would be great if we had some sort of like disaster response. What a terrible name for it, right? But that's me. I catastrophize a lot, and so I had mentioned that to you, and you guys actually came up with a really great, much better name, the Emergency Self Care Response Toolkit. I love that. So, and then you shared with me that you actually came up with a four-letter acronym. So this would be kind of what would go in this emergency self-care kit. So Stacy, do you want to kind of tell us what the acronym is, and then maybe we can go through each step?
Yeah. Yeah. So the acronym is CARE, and was just thinking kind of more of what you and Edward discussed, and he did a great job kind of breaking down like what's happening emotionally. Like we hear this announcement, we're flooded with emotion, and it's hard to be rational and to kind of think through. So this is something that in some of this, many listeners might kind of do naturally, but thinking about like how can we care for ourselves in these tender and difficult moments. So the first letter, um, care. The first C is come Holy Spirit, and kind of he talked about kind of taking a deep breath. So pairing those two things together, come Holy Spirit, and taking a deep breath, just to kind of attempt to regulate, to settle the brain a little bit. Um, and then the next letter was A, acknowledge the celebration. Like we want to be happy for our coworkers and acknowledge that this is a tough spot.
Yeah, I love that idea of taking that deep breath, slowing down, inviting the Holy Spirit in, because in what can be sort of like a supercharged moment, right? That especially if you're not necessarily expecting it, and that announcement comes, and you're in front of other people, perhaps, and it can just really take you by such surprise, and you need that even couple of seconds just to take that breath and to invite the Holy Spirit in. And I love also that you say that we need to acknowledge that that's a tender spot. That doesn't mean we have to make an announcement to the room, hey,
Right.
I'm really having a hard time with this, right? But to be able to acknowledge to ourselves, like, okay, yes, this is a little bit hard. Okay, Holy Spirit, give me the grace to be gracious,
Yeah.
essentially, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. An internal acknowledgement. Hmm. Yeah.
That's right, because I think sometimes too we can end up feeling guilty, like, wow, this is a happy occasion. I should just be happy and kind of forget about my feelings. So, the more we push them down, I think
Yeah.
the more apt they are to come out in ways that aren't good or productive or healthy for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we have come, Holy Spirit, acknowledge that tender spot. And then next is the letter R.
Yeah, so the next there is the R, is for recover, and we about kind of after doing those first two things, just thinking about what and where might be we being led to do to help process any emotions and um, grief in the moment. For example, it might mean just ex- excusing ourselves from the room just for a brief period of time, potentially
Mhm.
calling um, our spouse,
Yeah.
or a close friend, for example, but something to um, um, you know kind of um, um, begin to particularly like kind of bounce and respond to the jolt, and particularly as you said a couple minutes ago, Anne, that oftentimes like it can be most challenging is when it's a surprise announcement. We're already having just the challenges of the workday, and then out
Right.
of the blue, here comes this announcement. Stacey, I have some other things to add to
Yeah.
that as well, because on Recover, there are a few things we were thinking about.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's kind of the question like, what do I need to do to care for myself in this moment? Do I need to get it out of my head, as Todd said, and something that for us we kind of grew into is Todd would say, let me know. I want to be in this with you. So text me, call me. And so that could help me process through it faster because
Yeah.
otherwise then I ruminate. I'm sure our listeners have the experience of like it circles in your head and you try not to let it bother you. And the more you try, the more it does. And then you're not getting into your work. You're not getting your work done. Um, so just, and maybe it's a walk, maybe it's fresh air, maybe it's journal, but thinking, and everybody has their own strategy, their own go-to. I think, um, our spouses are our best friend and our
Yep.
greatest ally. So that, has been really helpful. And then I also think kind of, Edward was saying that we have this flood of emotions. The
Mhm.
emotional part of our brain takes over. Um, some research says that it can take about 20 or 30 minutes for our brain and body to settle down from that. So I think
Wow.
giving ourselves that time to recover, and I think the best case scenario is if we can get through whatever that trigger is and minimize the overflow into the day. I mean, it's okay if it takes 30 minutes, even an hour. And I'm sure I've had the experience, many others have had the experience of like, then it takes over the day. And then I come home and and I'm recounting it and it's taking over the evening. I think it's to the extent possible, we want to work to contain it in this recovery period.
Absolutely. And I love all of the suggestions that you gave there about, maybe excusing yourself for a few moments. Maybe you need to go to the restroom and splash a little cold water on yourself or, take a little walk. I love the idea of calling or texting your spouse. And then also another ally, maybe it's a coworker who you've shared a little bit with, who can kind of help hold you up, or even a friend, a friend that you can text really quickly who can kind of send you an encouraging word. Yeah, those kinds of things that you can already have in place. Because as Edward mentioned, in that moment, if it is a surprise, in that moment you can kind of be frozen. But if you sort of have these tools in place ahead of time, maybe it can be a little bit more automatic for your brain. Oh, okay, here's my plan. So I think that those are great suggestions. And then the last letter in this CARE acronym is E. What does E stand for?
To engage, to kind of work back into your daily task and just kind of reconnect. And like that might be a slow start. Like that's when you're doing those almost kind of brainless work tasks, those things that you
Hmm.
don't have to think a whole lot, just you're easing into. I'm looking for some quick success here, something that I can check off and feel like, okay, I'm getting my land legs back. I can move forward in the day.
That's great. Some of those things where you can get a quick success, I really like that because in that moment, yeah, you might just feel like, oh my gosh, like I think the rest of the day is a waste. Like, how am I going to get myself back? So those quick successes that you can kind of get to sort of get you back into the groove, I think that is a really great suggestion. I love the fact that the two of you kind of worked on this together. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that, because I think it's so important. Marriage is something we're in together. And when you have a season of infertility or loss on top of it, you really have to be together in that communication. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about how you kind of came to this. I would imagine that it was something you really had to work through because it probably wasn't just automatic. You probably unfortunately went through different experiences where you were feeling like, what do I do? So you could share a little bit about that with our listeners.
Yeah. Um, I think it was a combination of things. I think it was, we had a couple of conversations where we thought, well, this isn't working, um, and and we realized that we had different work cultures, and
Hmm.
we realized that that they were different, and so we were going to have to respond differently. Was one thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. To add to that, I think with these four things we're talking about, it kind of we're reflecting back on um, what's worked. What are some steps that have worked generally worked well for us. I mean, recognizing that there are going to be some situations or some days where it's just going to be, it's always going to be hard, but just extra
Yeah.
challenging. So, but I think sort of thinking about what are some things that we've done individually and together that for us have worked well, and wanted to share with the community in case the extent that it's helpful for anyone else who's listening. What seemed to have worked well often, and then trying to name it to be able to recall it a little faster with the acronym to kind of um, uh, center it and ground it a bit. So I think that's like it's sort of I guess been our experience, and then things we've heard just in general
Mhm.
from other people, particularly in this community and various outlets. So I'd say kind of a combination of our experience and what we've heard from others over the years that um, kind of
Yeah.
led to what we've been talking about here this today.
Yeah.
And to add to that, I think that like when it did work well, like when I did have a trigger and I reached out by phone or text, like talking about it that evening and checking in and saying, "Gosh, thank you for being there. That was super helpful." I think the little successes that we had, like affirming those, just gave us greater confidence too. So we kind of moved from this like this is really hard to talk about to, oh yeah, like we can walk through this together.
That's such a great point. And as both of you just shared, I was thinking that a sort of additional word that could be added to that last word, E, would be encouraged. Be
Mm,
encouraged
yeah.
that this is kind of trial and error, right? Like Todd said, there are times when it's still going to be hard, no matter how prepared you are. And that's just life. That's not even just a season of infertility or loss. I mean, that's all the different challenges that we have in life. So, I mean, I think the message for our listeners through this conversation is to be encouraged that, you know, there still will be challenges. Maybe things won't work perfectly, and it will take some cooperation together with our spouse, right? And if it doesn't work as well, if we fumble around with our words when we are trying to be kind and gracious to that person making the announcement, it's okay. As Edward said in that first episode, we can always go back and say, hey, I'm sorry that I kind of fumbled a little bit, but this was just a little hard to hear, or whatever we feel comfortable sharing. And then it's really going to build us up and make us stronger for the next time. And what I really appreciate about the two of you is that you did work through this together and are still working through it, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what marriage is. And so you cooperate and communicate with each other, and lean on each other. And I think that that's a really great message to leave with this community.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I would say that if folks are at a place where it's hard to talk about now, be encouraged because it doesn't, it won't stay there.
Yes. Absolutely. Gosh, I was thinking at the end of the day, whatever the challenges are in our jobs, whether they're super creative and fulfilling or, it's just a job to kind of make ends meet and pay the bills, that we remember that everything that we do in our workplace is at the service of our family, right?
Yeah,
No matter the
absolutely.
size of our family, we're doing it. We're doing it for ourselves and for our marriage.
Absolutely. And one little other plug I'll give is, um, we certainly did work at this. We didn't work at this alone. We also sought the counselor, the counsel of a professional counselor who supported us in this. So if there are others out there that are feeling like, I don't know, it truly, it helped give us the tools because we could talk about the situations in our session and kind of do some strategic planning.
Such a great point. Counseling, spiritual direction, community through Springs in the Desert and through other ministries. I think, the message at the end of the day is that this is not something that we have to carry alone. We
That's right.
need support systems outside, and we need to support each other within the marriage.
Accompaniment.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And we should be accompanying each other. As one of you had said, our spouse is our best friend. Let's accompany and walk with each other, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This was so wonderful. Todd and Stacy, I'm always so happy to be with you. And you have such great wisdom to share, that is, I know, the fruit of your own marriage. So I'm so appreciative that you are sharing with us today.
Oh, thanks, Anne. It's a gift to give back.
Yeah, thanks for the chance to join you and have this discussion. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And listeners, just please know that we are here with you. We're here to walk with you, to accompany you, and to encourage you. And so until next time, take care and God bless you.